Today's espresso break, 2:30 on Wednesdays, that's when we usually have our espresso here at Casa Italia Library. And since we can't do it in person, we are doing it via Zoom. And our guest today is Louis Corsino. Lou is a professor of sociology and criminal justice, and he's also head of the department at North Central College in Naperville. He's a Chicago Heights native. I think I'm too old to know him, but to have grown up with him, but I've gotten to know him the last 10 years, and I'm pleased to know that there's somebody else in academia who started off from Chicago Heights. Well, Lou has talked about women in his writings, and he's talked about, theorized about the motivations for involvement in in criminal activities and how that relates to ethnicity. And so he's going to summarize some of his research and writing for us today, focused on the concept of hope as a motivating factor among the immigrants. Lou?
Thank you, Dominic. And you can hear me and everything?
Yeah.
Okay. I think Dominic grew up in the better part of town. That's why we didn't know each other. I don't think it's age so much. And Dominic and Sammy Chimbroni were on a different political side than my family was. So that sort of caused some things. Though I was on Dominic's and Sammy's side.
You followed, Al Capone was a Republican, and Sam Chimbroni was a Democrat. So.
Yeah, I think Al Capone was who he wanted to be, right? One of the things that, I've done some research, I did the research on organized crime, and when I was doing the research on organized crime, one of the questions that I kept coming back to is, why didn't more people engage in organized crime? That when I looked at Italians in Chicago Heights, it was a tough life. Organized crime was an avenue, moral or immoral, for engaging in activities. So that started me thinking about how did the Italian immigrants in Chicago Heights at the turn of the last century, how did they live their lives? Okay, and it led me to this idea about hope, and one of stop me anytime, please. One of the main ideas that I've come to conclude is that hope is distributed unequally in society. Some people have more of a need for hope than other people do. So in other words, if you're Bill Gates, you don't really need hope. I mean, you can do pretty much what you want. You have the resources, you have the strategies. You may hope to make another $1 billion, but you don't really need it. Other people who are put upon have to rely upon hope as an avenue for moving forward in society. And as I started to look at it, I saw that immigrants, by their very nature of being immigrants, at least most immigrants, come to a different country because they're trying to change their social positions in some ways. And so they do that on the basis of the hope that they have a greater need for hope, because they're moving countries, and all that involves in terms of getting rid of friends and seeing different, moving geographically and going on those ships, those steerage ships. They did that with the idea, or with the notion that hope that they would somehow change their conditions when they moved to another country. So I'm interested in this idea of how hope is a motivator. But the more I stop me, please. That doesn't make sense. The more I researched it, though, I came to the conclusion that hope is not good. that in the wrong hands, hope can be used to guide people in ways that other people want them to act, as opposed to the people themselves wanting to act. And if that makes sense, and what I mean by that is that if you look at the Italian immigration at the turn of the last century, hope was used to lure immigrants, the Italian immigrants, especially from the Mezzogiorno. Hope was used to lure them to America. You know, the idea that the streets were paved with gold and the like. And, you know, some, from what you read, some immigrants actually thought that was the case. But I think hope was used as a lure to get people to come to America to fulfill the needs of other people as opposed to the immigrants themselves. And so in that sense, I think hope was manipulated. Hope was manipulated to the advantage of some people as opposed to the other people. Like even the Italian government at the turn of the last century wanted the immigrants to leave because they wanted especially in the poor immigrants from the South, they wanted them to leave. And so they were giving them hope that the United States would be a better country because they wanted them to leave, because a large part of the problem would leave if a lot of these poor people left Southern Italy. And if they would have remittances back into it, that'd be better off. In fact, you look at Steamate, you look at the steamship agents, you look at Padronis, you look at other people, they were all in some ways based their activities on luring and encouraging immigrants to move because of this idea of hope. And so I started to worry about that hope was used not to necessarily make people have a better life, but to make them have the life that other people wanted them to have. And so I, as I did the research and did some interviews and did some other things along the way, I came to the conclusion that when immigrants came to America, they had sort of three options. They responded in three general ways. One is the Italian immigrants in Chicago Heights, when they came to America, they engaged in resignation. That is, they said, okay, I'm in America. I don't have the life that I thought I would have, but I'm here and I'm resigned to it. My grandmother was always, you know, she understood English, but she didn't really speak it very well. But she was resigned to a life in America, really without hope. Hope was not, you know, it was an arranged marriage and she came here at 16 years old. I can't say that she was hopeful. I mean, she was made to come here. So she ended up resigning herself to sort of living in America and, you know, having a good life, you know, with family. But so there are many people who adapted to America in terms of resignation. I forgot the author, but The Christ in Concrete. The whole
Pietro Di Donato.
Donato, the whole idea that these hands aren't my hands, the wheelbarrow that I push, you know, and it's against his destiny in some ways. That this whole idea about the theme of that novel is that he comes here and he's resigned to the fact of not being Italian and not having the hope. And so I think that's one theme. The other theme is other people came here and engaged in dissent. They said, well, America is not what I thought it was going to be. We need to change it. And so they engaged in activities to sort of union activities, labor activities, to sort of change the structures that were here. The third option was to hope, was to accept the way that other people said they should be, to have hope, to have ambitions. And in that way, if they did that, then they became accepted members of American society. Italian immigrants became accepted of it. If they didn't, then they were alien. The people who, my grandmother was really always an alien. She was never a part of America. The union organizers, the Carl Trescas, they were alien. They were foreign elements. The people that the Italians that sort of bought into it because they were smart. They bought into it because they realized if they're going to be successful here, you have to have hope. And so that the question that I raise is hope something that the Italians themselves sort of generated, or was it a hope and the way it was structured given to them by other people, in some ways to their disadvantage? And so that's the thesis that I'm trying to talk about and discover. And it goes against some of the, you know, go ahead.
Did you find information about Carla Tresca's visit to Chicago Heights?
Yeah, you know, he visited Chicago Heights, and there was a good deal of antipathy on the part of administrative officials towards him, and so they set up police right before the Union Hall, right before I think it was the cooperative. They set up police right before, and police would know. Pardon? They put a couple of police officers at the gate where at the door where these Trescas, where some of the union organizers in Tresca were going to have a rally, and the police officers, Chicago police officers, would know the Italians coming in. They would be taking names, and so it was Tresca's visit to Chicago Heights was described as a way of distinguishing the loyal Italians from the unloyal Italians. And I think go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead, fine.
Who wants to speak? Is it Peter?
No, I didn't raise a question.
Okay.
Oh. Well, I'll inject something. What sources did you have? I think there was a Star article on it, and they in Chicago Heights, especially the Marchigiani, had a cooperative store for many years, which was sort of a socialist effort to beat the normal retail system.
Right. That's and because of, I think, a lot of the turmoil that are caused, and because Tresca eventually, you know, when, you know, and some of the problems with Tresca and what happened to him, the socialist sort of movement in Chicago Heights sort of stopped right around then. Though there are other people there's some FBI files about Dominic Morelli. He was a socialist who was charged with espionage because he engaged in, you know, some sort of social activity in Chicago Heights. And the FBI, there's some FBI stuff where they come to visit him in his barbershop, and they looked at some of the books that he had, and there was a book on Marx there, and so they wrote it down that there was a book on Marx in his you know, in his barbershop. And so it was a chill. I think there was a chill that happened because in some ways, a certain segment of the population were seen as more alien and not seen as, you know, American. And in fact, the FBI agents even said that, charged them with being un-American. So in some ways, because my thesis is because they didn't necessarily adopt the idea that you should be hopeful, and hopeful means to be American. I mean, standing tall and not stooping like a, you know, what is it? The Ellis Island was called what? Ellis Island, the nickname for Ellis Island was called the Island of Hope, and the island of despair. Yeah. I mean, and when the Italians came over on the ship and having to, you know, go through that, I mean, the month on the ship and all that sort of stuff that happens on the ship, and then they see the Statue of Liberty, you couldn't help but get the message that in order to be American, you had to be hopeful. You had to adopt this sort of ways that Americans saw hopefulness. And I don't know if that means, one of my underlying theses is, I don't know, what if the Italians give up too much in the process? Did the Italians give up their Italianness in order to become less alien?
Yeah, they certainly gave up the language pretty easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna, Lou, do you mind if I,
No,
no, I was thinking that too, as you were saying that. With hope, it's almost like it meant assimilation, really.
Yeah.
That going back to what you were saying with, the Christ in Concrete, the Pietro di Donato novel, you have two sides of actually all these responses that you outlined, resignation, dissent, and hope, are outlined in that novel. The beginning is very hopeful. Pietro, the father figure, is about to buy a house.
Right.
He's done everything right, and he's bought into that dream. And what happens? He's killed, in a horrible construction. So that's sort of the illusion that, yeah, you bought into this and you worked hard, but for what? That you were doing it to make these other people rich and build these buildings, and you're expendable. And then you have the dissent coming out, and the son figure afterwards too. And then there were, so yeah, but I think that's true. Like, how much did they give up? It was a loss of your Italianness. If you look at the people who were the resignation, like you were talking about your grandmother, who was still speaking her language and living her life and according to the the values and culture she lived with, or the people who were the dissidents were certainly fighting for something that kept them more closely aligned with their culture of origin. But no, I that really struck me with hope. Does hope mean assimilation? Yeah.
Well, what's interesting to me about hope is that it goes deeper than assimilation. It's assimilation at a pretty deep level, because hope is also an emotion, right? Hope is an emotion. It's an attitude. It's a belief. It's a way of acting. And when you buy into hope, you're not only accepting a belief about what life should be like, you're physically and emotionally connected to this idea that may be yours or maybe other people's ideas of how you should act and think and feel. And to that extent, I think it's a pretty, and it has obviously advantages. It had advantages for many people. Many people live better lives, but it also meant that you had to give up something. And that bargain, that's what I'm trying to, what's that bargain? In fact, one of the things I look at is home ownership, and years after they came here. And so I think part of being American was to own a home. And in fact, there's research that says that if you rented and if you were seen as shifty, you were seen as not committing yourself, you were birds of passage. You were not committing to American society if you still rented. And so buying home was some ways in which Italians sort of lived a better life, because there's a lot of good things to having a home, but it also was demonstrating to the people that are already here, I'm one of you. And so homeownership becomes one of the criteria for demonstrating to the people that are already here, the natives that are already here, that I'm one of you. And so homeownership becomes important, I think,
Lou,
that process.
did you come across the Dante Club?
Yes, the Dante Club. that was, and you probably know more about it than I do, Dominic, but Dante Club was more of a middle class sort of assimilative group of Italians than some of the other Calabrese Society and the Union Siciliana. That there was, the Dante Club was embracing hope and assimilation in a more obvious way than maybe other groups were. And the other sort of social clubs, mutual aid societies, were still doing the old, playing pinochle and drinking their wine and going from house to house drinking wine. The Dante Club was more trying to assimilate, right?
Yeah. I can remember that there were, my father was born in Italy
Mhm.
and came as an adult. My mother came as a child. And we had people living near us on the hill who looked down on us because we weren't as Americanized as they were.
Yeah.
And they were the ones who bought cars and were interested in sports and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. They were more Americanized. So there was a gradation that came with it. Let's see, there's, who's at the iPhone 31226?
That's me. That's me. I want to ask a question. But Lou, these people could not have been all of one piece. They must have come from different places, had different levels of education, right?
Not southern Italy so much. I mean, southern Italy, there wasn't a great deal of education,
Yeah, but
educational.
Southern Italy, there were lots of parts to Southern Italy.
Yeah, but
Well,
the parts that came to Chicago Heights were from, you
Where?
know, well,
read my article,
that's right.
Ethnic Chicago from 1980. I
So,
I did a survey of people who applied for citizenship. And,
Yeah, but tell me, where were they from, Domenico?
okay, they were from San Benedetto del Tronto and the Marche region mainly. They were from Amazzano, my mother's hometown near Frosinone, and they were from Sicily. They were from Cacamo in Sicily, and then there were a few other places. But they did have those basic three. The Marchigiani were the most numerous.
yeah,
The
my
Marchigiani were the most numerous?
Yes.
well,
Was the Italian standard? Did anybody have standard Italian, or was it all various dialects?
They were dialects.
All of them?
There were a few people. I think Marino Richton went to Northwestern, and he could recite the opening paragraph of Dante, but there were a couple of people who had a little bit of smarts or education, formal education, but most of them did not.
So they couldn't even read?
Well, my father went to the 5th grade. My grandfather, I don't think he was totally illiterate, but a lot of them just signed with an X.
Yeah, a lot of them. Some of them could read, but then to read in English is another challenge.
No, I'm talking about Italian.
Yeah. So that was some came from a lot of my people in Chicago Heights came from La Mezzia Terme, which is in the instep, Nicastro, San Biase. So they came from really parts of Italy, near the toe of Italy, and that was the poorest region. They came from there. Marchigianis were a little bit more well off, more educated, more well off than people from further south.
Professore Candeloro, posso fare una domanda?
Sì.
Oh, Rosie.
Hello, everybody. I finally got connected. I was having some problems with the mic. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing my best from Rome each time to finish my work and get connected with this wonderful group. And I consider it a great privilege. My family came from Southern Italy, from the Mezzogiorno, concerned with the relationship between immigration and criminology. Here in Italy, at the country of immigrants into a country of emigration, to a country of immigration, Some consider this a kind of historical nemesis. Now, through my own experience as the daughter of Italian immigrants to the United States, and now as a school principal, I try to get some insight as to how to deal with inclusion at school, and also connecting and sort of believing in following the creed that there can be social mobility thanks to education, but especially inclusion. Now, the Italian government has been on the alfabetizzazione della lingua italiana, meaning learning the Italian language, which is very difficult. Considering myself, my own experience, I could not pick up the standard Italian language so easily. And my mother spoke a dialect which was a mixture of Basilicata. I see Peter, who also has his family coming from Basilicata, and Campania. So it's something like from a minimum of 1 year to a maximum of 3 to 4 or 5 years, and with still some problems of language interference. Now, my question for Professor Corsini, since, I mean, you know, in certain areas of Italy, like in big cities, the metropolitan area, the government is all education in order to solve life and deviancy among adolescents, teenagers, and then in their future life. My opinion was, and I started on with my schools first in Milan, that Professor Candeloro visited some years ago. We were honored to have him with us. And then in Rome, we are doing some research on actually having learn their own original, their native language. Why so? Because it seems, according to Jim Cummings, that the more you learn your own language, the more you pick up an extra language, which is the language of the country that is welcoming you.
Yeah, you broke up a little
No.
bit. Can you do a recap of what you said?
Oh, I was willing to ask Professor Corsino, as he was saying that Italian immigrants should have been more into the American system, learning less of. Does Professor Corsino think about this initiative on having foreigners, in this case, people coming from Northern Africa and other parts of the world? I have lots of Chinese students, Korean students, learning learn the Italian language easier, because according to linguists, it is, and not only linguists, but also to psychologists, they can get into a syndrome of schizophrenia and therefore enter criminal life. What is your opinion, Professor Corsino, kindly?
I think I didn't hear the whole question, but I guess what I think from a linguistic point of view, I think that you can make a good argument what you're saying. But let me phrase it differently. From a cultural point of view, what if an immigrant comes to a country and decides not to learn the language, but not to learn the language of the native country, of the new country, but keep their own language? What sort of consequences would that have for there being acceptance in society? You have to sort of learn both languages, but can you be bilingual? Can you be bilingual? And isn't that an advantage to be bilingual? But what happened to Italians early in the last century is that to be bilingual in Italian was considered to be a negative, that you had to speak English, you had to speak American. And so from a linguistic point of view, I think you're perfectly right. I think, you know, that to learn the language, but I can't imagine. My grandmother was, you know, never really spoke English very well, and she was always marginalized. She was outcast. I think
How did you do with counting money?
She could count money. she's pretty good at counting money. Okay, and she she would open up her little, purse, with a little snap on it, and pull out the dollar bills, and so that was okay. But she was, she lived from 16 years old to 16-year-old when she came here, and she died when she was 92. But to say that she was part of America is a stretch. And she lived here, but she lived, she spent most of her life in the basement, the Italian basement, and she had, kids and that sort of stuff. But I don't. Learning a language is critical, but it's the argument we have today, or some people have today, with people from Latin American countries. Some people argue that in order to be American, you can't speak Spanish. You have to speak English. Well, those people who keep their Spanish and learn American are much more valuable and much more employable and interesting, perhaps, than people who submit to one language. And I'm a person who is challenged every day by my inability to, even though I've tried to learn Italian. And so I wish, if I had to do it again, I would have told the Italians back then, keep your Italian language, learn English, but keep both. And I think that would have been a more vibrant sort of culture and experience, rather than giving it up. And most second generation Italians, at least in Chicago Heights, gave it up. And I'm one of those,
Yeah, the parents were in no way equipped to teach the language to their children. They didn't really know the official Italian language.
Yeah,
and they weren't bookish at all.
How did that change the character of children to their parents in America? And for you, Dominic, how did that change when the child spoke English and the parent had difficulty speaking English? How did that refigure the relationship, the family relationships, as they came to America?
I see this all the time.
Yeah.
My tenants, my Hispanic tenants, I sometimes have to communicate with it through their 10 or 12-year-old children. And then the 10 or 12-year-old child gets to be part of the negotiation process and maybe matures and develops more quickly and better. I was never in that position because although my father did not speak fluent English, my mother did. She came here when she was 5 years old, and
Right,
she spoke without an accent.
So let me ask you, everybody, Dominic in particular, what's the goal of Casa Italia? In that it's not just, my guess is that the goal, and I'll throw out an idea. The goal of Casa Italia is not just to go be nostalgic and go back and look at Italian culture in America historically through time. It's to keep, in some ways, an Italianness and an Italian sort of way of looking at the world alive, right? In America.
Yeah, save our stories is a slogan that we have. And
why save the stories? Because,
well, to honor the ancestors and to honor their adventure and their guts.
yeah. What if can we do it? What if Italians would have kept their Italianness more so, hadn't given it up as much, hadn't gone into this whole Americanization and whole. What would being Italian in America and look like today if Italians would have kept more of their Italianness and not given as much of it up? How would we live our lives today? In terms of Casa Italia would be out of business because we'd be more Italian today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in a sense, you're right. but there's always somebody who has lost it and we need to bring back. But I guess the other end of this is that it seems almost inevitable that Italianness will disappear over the generations. And we want
That's
to do whatever.
Richard Alba's thesis,
Yeah,
the twilight of ethnicity.
you're right. And we want to keep what's left and do the best in terms of preservation of something that we value, a way of life, a historical or humanistic outlook toward things.
See, I don't think it's gone forever. I think the more discussion we have about it, the more you do the work that you do, the more we have these sort of encounters that we are bringing back in some ways. I'm not trying, not that we should go back and, live in, 1900, Southern Italy, but we're trying to make a more balanced culture today about what it means to be Italian in the culture, in American culture, and what it means to be American, as opposed to an overriding assimilation, in which, you had to be 110% American in order to be accepted.
Yeah,
I think
Richard Gandino talked about a creative ethnicity, where you're one ethnic group and partly American, and it gives you double the tools for interpreting and enjoying life and what life throws at you. And so that's oh, we have somebody with their hand up.
Yeah.
It's little Gloria.
Yeah,
Gloria.
I want to say that there's just so many Italians. We're talking about people with different dialects from all over the place. I don't think you can lump them in one group.
Better yet. So there's not one Italian way of living. There's multiple ways, and that's been lost. That has been, you're right, Gloria, that has been lost. That Italians become this homogenized sort of group, as opposed to all.
I think Italians become homogenized. I think Italians personally, I think I have both sides, but I speak standard Italian. I think that makes an enormous difference.
You're a rare bird.
No, so does Jeanette.
Well, I speak standard Italian, but I had to go to school to learn it. It was lost in my family. I just think that so much of this is resonating with me. One of the books I teach often in my classes is Helen Barolini's Umbertina.
Right.
And that has to do with loss and recovery of the ethnic heritage. And that's there's the generation that didn't learn the Italian and actually turned away and bought into all that hope. And it left a legacy across the generations, even if what you don't know. Oh, I've got an echo of myself. I don't like that.
We all do.
It's in you there somewhere. And also, I agree with this idea that you reimagine and you recreate your ethnicity as you go forward, just as Italians in Italy today are not the same as they were at the turn of the century.
Oh my God, no.
No. So you move forward. But you need the more richness you have, that inventory of the past to give you your sense of self, the more equipped you are to feel like a whole person and give your best. So I think that's part of what Casa Italia does. It gives you access to those pieces of culture and history that might have been lost, but you need to make them your own. You need to understand there's a lot of silence that's gone across the generations that can be filled in and should be filled in. So.
Okay, any more comments?
Yes, I do, of course.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in an odd position because I really didn't grow up in an immigrant family. My father was actually born here, and so was my mother, and so was her mother. So we go back many. You didn't have Italian grandma in the kitchen cooking all day long.
Agree, me too.
So, my dad used to speak dialect to his brother. They were both born here. So I always had a good ear for languages. So I picked it up when he would talk in dialect, but I really didn't learn Italian until I went to school in college. And I had simultaneously learning Spanish at the same time. So that was a trip and a half to do 2 languages at once. But I feel when you learn more than one language, it really makes your life richer. And I have close ties with my relatives in Italy, and I call them once in a while, and we discuss the COVID situation when it started over there. And I know a lot of people who don't even know where their family comes from in Italy, let alone a dialect. Say, where are you from? Oh, I don't know. We don't remember the name of the town. They just, they've kind of been severed from that. But the only way to become American is to assimilate, but that doesn't mean you have to give up your history, your family history. I've always found it very wonderful to know my relatives and hear stories. I mean, we could never go for a walk without hearing family stories. Do you know what this is? And they'd hold up some twig on the road and say, oh, this is for such and such, and give me a Socratic lecture of how things work. So, I mean, it was a lesson all the time. And, you have to put yourself out there to become a part of it. You just can't sit there and have pizza all the time and say, I'm Italian. There's a lot more to it. And then modern Italians are not the same. I had an uncle who was from Gubbio, and we went to see his relatives when we were on a trip, and he just wouldn't believe that. He thought they were still living like they did in the 30s in desperate times. We told him, oh no, they were nice. They had marble floors, and he just would never believe it. And there's a lot of people who still think, oh, did you have to bring toilet paper to Italy? Toilet paper. Well, they have everything that we have. My aunts had maids. My mother's there looking. They had a lady come in and do the cleaning and whatever. We didn't have a maid. I told my dad at one point, I said, you should have stayed in Italy. You would have been better off at some point. But, they had a terrible time during the war, of course. But, oh, you are. I mean, it's always an advantage to learn something, and you don't have to go and brag about it. It's just part of your culture. It becomes part of you when you are able to watch a Spanish movie and know what they're saying, or hear somebody in the store. I had to chase after some Spanish speaking lady one day because she didn't have her keys. She left them on the counter, so I knew the word for keys and gave it to her. I mean, that gave me pleasure to be able to communicate with her. So, I like to do that with the Italians, but the Italians are all different. We're mostly Northern Italians, although I had a Sicilian grandfather. The quite different still. There's a lot of people who just keep to themselves, and there's a lot of people that are in the basement rather than mixing with other people.
Exactly.
And it's different. You have to make an effort to do it. To learn something is really worth it.
Okay, Lou, you want to sum up? And then we'll go around and ask each person to say something for the good of the order, or communicate to the rest of us.
Yeah, well, I guess my major thesis is that I think you pay a price, and Italian immigrants in the past paid a price for holding on to their Italianness. And I don't think it should be that way. And I think there's lessons to be learned, not just with Italians today, but with other groups that are coming into America today. The Italians can serve as some sort of test case or model for how we can deal with the challenges to immigration today and the like. I think Italians provide a wonderful way in which we can understand how you live a life, but without attempting to give up your life and your cultural legacies in the past. And that's what I'm, in some small way, I'm trying to do with the stuff that I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, don't hold your breath on the liberal attitude toward immigrants. Italian Americans I've run into are strong supporters of the president's immigration policy. And
Well,
Gloria.
yeah, I think, we're all educated people who are perfectly at home in the United States. And many of us speak perfect Italian. I can't even imagine the lives that these people had when they came. And so it's so easy to say, well, they should have done this or they should have done. I don't know. I think they, as most people do, they did the best they could do. That's simplistic, perhaps, but I don't know.
Okay. Carla, do you have something you want to add to close out?
Oh, no, this is fascinating. I really think that in addition to looking for your stories, like I said, what has been forgotten is still a part of you. There's reasons why things were left out, and knowing what that is, it's fulfilling. It's part of yeah. We should know more about our past. And Lou, just one quick question: Are you looking specifically at the turn of the century, like early 20th century, that period?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's pretty much the Italians, the first wave of Italians who hit the United States.
Okay, so you're focusing on that. So because there's historical conditions that surrounded that as well, so that contributes to
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ideas is that the Italians, because of the historical conditions, didn't have hope. They had to go through the Depression. They had to go through, World War II. It took World War II, and as Dominic has written, it took World War II for Italians to be accepted.
Right.
Damn. I mean, it took a world war for Italians to be accepted in the United States because they were seen as immigrants, as aliens. So that to me is crazy, right? Anyway.
Ross had a question, and then Peter.
Yeah. I just wanted to say it might be helpful, Professor, if you try other words besides hope, because hope is a virtue that everyone needs. But I think what you mean is more like advancement or getting ahead or mobility. Italians were lured with mobility. If you go to America, you'll be upwardly mobile.
Well, that's I don't know, but that's how I objectify hope. That hope in America was seen as wanting mobility, wanting to get ahead. That's not necessarily an Italian trait, wanting to get ahead.
No, not at all.
But when you come to America, if you say, I'm not interested in getting ahead, I'm not interested in a better job, then all of a sudden you're the alien because you don't have the hope for mobility. And so in order to be accepted, you had to say, damn, I want this. But in some ways, that had implications for your family, it had implications for a whole bunch of other things. So I agree with what you're saying. Hope is a word that's laden with a lot of sort of other sort of things that we have to say.
Anna and then Barbara.
Oh, I don't have there. There's Anna.
Anna?
I'll be a silent observer today. Sorry.
Yeah, we had Peter had a question.
Okay. Okay, we'll go to Peter, then Barbara.
Yeah, I'm reflecting over this election and these conventions, and I remember my goodness, it must have been the 70s. There was a popular book, The Rise of the Unmeltable Ethnics, and at that time, Mario Cuomo was stepping up in New York State, and we had Geraldine Ferrara by the 80s. That sort of passed away from popularity because they didn't in fact get elected, but they stayed in their state governments. Now it's a great asset to have Kamala Harris to be able to brag about her Indian background, her Jamaican roots. We're really searching carefully for these candidates that can be ethnic and look ethnic, and it's become a real asset this year, in this election year. I digress. You want to add to that? add to that? I'm just considering it, throwing it out there, that it's so valuable now, ethnic and racial, in the political mix.
But it's a sort of window dressing. I mean, and then you're talking about people with immense amounts of education. So it's a very different ball game than it was with what Lou is talking about.
Right.
Barbara, let's hear from you.
Well, as most of you know, any of you know me, I'm not Italian. And I've just tried to be Italian for the last 40 years, living there for a while. I experienced some of the reverse of what you're talking about, but I do have a master's in linguistics too, so I totally understand what you were saying about holding on to the language, and it does separate family. It separates the mother particularly from her children, and that said, you know, that he deals with the 12-year-old when he talks to his tenants. And that's what happens. And I don't know, I hope we can figure this out. Even in Italy, they're having trouble holding on to their culture.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I was just there a year ago today, actually. And it changes every time you go, but they're losing some of their culture. So I hope people like you can help us to not lose that. It's a wonderful culture.
How about our telephone guest? Can you join us? Do you have any questions, comments?
Is that you, Sam? I guess not.
Rosie was on the line.
I'm here, Dom.
Oh, okay, Sam. Sam Chambroni, former mayor of Chicago Heights. He's formerly my boss. He is a lawyer in Chicago Heights and knows the city better than anyone. Your comments about what Lou had to say earlier and anything else?
Oh, it was an education, a re-education. So no, very interesting. It's Lou, it's hearing you. And it's a question. We have to try to convince the ones that are away from the first or second generation Italians. We have like Heinz 57. It's a different culture.
Yeah, I think Sammy is actually. I think my grandmother was Sammy's godmother, right? If I'm right. Yeah.
Luigi Comara Beppina.
Yeah. So
my godparents.
Yeah. So you knew the basement. You knew the basement, right? The basement on the east side, and yeah.
When I was in college delivering Christmas mail, and I had the east side, Blue.
Yeah.
That was a good place to get warm.
That's right. And that's such a culture, and that's such a wonderful aspect. That's lost. So that's what I'm trying to say, that maybe we gave up too much of that sort of stuff along the lines. But Sammy's been great to me for the years too. Thank you, Sam.
No, it's very good to talk about it, and hopefully the next generation will remember us.
Yep.
Well, we're putting together a lot of stuff that they could refer to, but whether they're going to make the effort is another question.
So we got to instill that they do it.
Yeah.
You know, not insist, but tell them you should. It's an education to know a different way.
So true. Well, on that note, Peter, you have one last question?
A little more for Dr. Corsino. What happened to your parents as far as the trades or professions? What happened to your parents in regard to careers? Was there hope? I'll use that word.
Well, it's my mother's Lithuanian, so only my father's Italian. And my father, this is a long story, but my father, World War II and, came back, and my father got into organized crime. He wasn't.
Not really.
Yeah. No, really. He wasn't, he wasn't like at the top, but he worked for the jukebox companies, and so he was pretty involved, but not in the
But
not
that
in
was
the
deployment.
not in the violent parts of it, but yeah, we grew up in that culture. So, and my father, that was his hope. He never had an education, quit high school, during the Depression, in junior year. And so his hope was, to, work in the factories, but the factories were just awful places to work with. Tar factories, come home with tar all over him. So he got an opportunity to make a lot more money doing, pretty standard stuff with the jukeboxes. But so that was his ways of sort of dealing with the hope.
Yeah, the good old cooperative record company.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
With emphasis on cooperative.
That's right.
Well, thank you, everyone. We'll do this again next week. And if you have any suggestions for special guests or topics of discussion, send them to me or anyone else in the group. Thank you very much, and I hope to
Ciao
see you.
Domenico, grazie.
Professore
Piacere mio.
Candeloro.
Thank you very much.
Piacere.
Thank you. Grazie.
Oh.
Mille grazie.